When you're sad, you don't act like yourself. You gotta think of everything while you're writing it. Gotta keep the right punctuation. Gotta make sure capital letters. Gotta use phonics. Difficult. I've read to 200 people. I'm trying to communicate with them so they can pass my letter on to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. If we don't have communication, then we can't share our ideas. When everybody comes together, they share their ideas and make it fun and happy.
Welcome to this podcast where we'll discuss reading and really delve into what that might look like in schools, some of the challenges that we face around reading and what we can do about it. My name's Carl, I'm a literacy advisor and I worked as part of the Priority Literacy Project where we put reading at the heart of what we did with schools. So I've got two guests with me and these are the best people to talk about the hot topic at the minute, reading fluency, and all the other elements of reading that we might delve into. Penny, do you want to introduce yourself?
So my name's Penny Slater. I work for a company called HFL Education, which is a school improvement company, and I work alongside my colleague Kathy on leading the work on our Reading Fluency project.
I'm Kathy Rowe, also an advisor at HFL Education, really passionate about the teaching of reading. Penny and I are both experienced teachers ourselves before we came into advisory, and really passionate about that hot topic of reading fluency and our work on our project there.
Okay, so before we delve into this idea of fluency and how we work together at the Priority Literacy Project and the Hearts for Learning team, let's talk a little bit wider about reading. So what do you guys feel are some of the current challenges around reading that our young people are facing? What maybe your thoughts on why it is so important we need to get our young people reading and wanting to read?
I think my impetus always comes back to the fact that reading for so many adults and children sounds like a cliche actually, but it is that escape. It's that opportunity to just, when things get a bit too much, you can take yourself into a space and you can go into somebody else's world for a short while. And I think that's harder and harder to do now, and perhaps more and more important for children and adults alike to have that opportunity to just take themselves aside, take themselves away. And in doing so, you never know what you're going to learn about yourself, most importantly, I think, when it comes to reading. It's that opportunity to learn from experiences that you might not yet have encountered, but you can encounter them through the characters that you are connecting with. And that's a life experience in itself. So if, for whatever reason, your life experiences are somewhat limited, that is one way to experience, to have those experiences without actually having the means or the opportunities to do so.
So you could delve into it in maybe in worlds that you can't even visit.
Yeah, it prepares you. There are so many situations that I've been in life where I think, actually, I can relate in some way to this, even though I've never been in that situation before. And I think it's because of the reading that I've done and those connections. So in some small part, you have done that before because you read about a character who did, and you can learn from that. So I suppose, for me, that's probably the richest reason that I would want all children to be able to read. There are a million other reasons.
There are. Yeah, there are. In addition to that, which always reminds me of that quote from Reading Bishop about books being windows and mirrors, and it's so important for children to see themselves in the literature they read, as well as having those doors and windows open to other worlds as well, which is what you've spoken about there. But in addition to that richness around reading for pleasure, it's really important that we come back to remembering that so many aspects of the rest of the curriculum that the children need to access at school, their maths lessons, their history lessons, their science lessons, their geography lessons, so much learning is done through reading in the school day, more than we really realise when we delve into how very much we expect children to learn from reading throughout the school day, and what a great disadvantage they're at at if they're unable to read competently, fluently, with comprehension at the point of reading. They're disadvantaged across the curriculum, and of course that's going to have a huge impact on their self-esteem and their vision of themselves more widely. So if we can close that reading gap for children, we can close not only a reading gap, but an attainment gap, full stop, and a life chances gap. We can support children to close that when we teach them how to read well.
And I think what we've said in the past, Kathy, is that children know. They know if they're not good at reading, and they know pretty early on. I mean, the majority of our work, certainly in the early days when we were focusing on reading fluency, focused on those children towards the end of the primary schooling, ready for transition into secondary school. So we're talking age 10 and 11. Already by that stage, children know if they are not good readers. They are already at that stage, and probably several years before, developing those quite sophisticated masking strategies, which they absolutely master by the time they get into secondary school. And underneath all of those masking activities, or the reason why they introduce those activities, is because they know it's not a good thing to be a struggling reader, and they will do almost anything to cover that fact. And not be targeted. But of course, what we have to do as educators is acknowledge the massive disadvantage pupils have if they are struggling with reading, and not unmask that if we don't have a solution, because that's just not fair. But if we have a solution, and we've been working really hard on that, then actually we should be tenacious about spotting those children who are really struggling and getting some support in for all those reasons that Kathy said.
Okay, so it's more than just knowing what the benefits are. I mean, because we could sit here all day and talk about the benefits of reading. I think we've had that for years, haven't we? You must read because of A, B, and C. So what do you think are sort of at the heart of this thing? So you talked about those children that are at disadvantage, the ones that need our help, maybe the ones that are not bought into this. What do you think is often at the base of that, and why children are able to read or immersing themselves in these worlds? What do you guys think about any root causes, I guess?
I think we're really, really good in the UK now at approaching the teaching of reading with a phonics first approach, and I think it's really important that children learn the code, because when you look at a piece of text in front of you, there's a code there that needs to be broken, and we're really confident now in the UK at delivering teaching of that code really, really effectively. And what happens there is then children are able to read the words aloud on the page, and they're able to read those words aloud with pretty good accuracy. And that gets many children on that correct trajectory to becoming a good reader and a confident reader. And that path continues, and they get to the end of primary school and they're able to read, and they do it volitionally and they read a lot. But what some children are able to do is break that code and read correctly the words on the page, but the bit that takes them to comprehension seems to be missing. And they've accurately said those words, they've decoded them, they've read to the end of a piece of text that we might have asked them to read, but they're demonstrating very little understanding at the point of reading. And if we're not understanding something at the point of reading it, then there's going to be no joy derived from that activity. And all the stuff that you mentioned earlier about empathy and making connections, none of that's going to come to you. And you're going to perceive this exercise in decoding, in saying these words aloud with accuracy, as something that's quite boring and quite painful and quite difficult and laborious. And what we need to do is work out for our children that are struggling to read, whether or not the difficulty sits within the breaking of the code itself, or whether it's something to do with comprehension. And it's very often the latter, because we know how to fix the form, and that's easier to identify. So it's often the latter. And that's where schools try lots and lots of different things, and parents try lots and lots of different things to try and support children to understand the text. And actually, very often, the difficulty isn't to do with the comprehension or lack thereof. It's something in between that word reading and that comprehension. And that's what we call reading fluency. That's that path between decoding and our ultimate goal, comprehension. We don't want children to read fluently so that they sound good to listen to. We want children to read fluently so that the text can come to life for them when they start to read, so that they can derive joy from that reading activity.
I love that. I can remember, I wasn't a great reader. I can remember I was about 10 years old, and it's probably not the case, but they pretty much gave up on listening to me read because it was painful for them. It was certainly painful for me. I had some great feedback. Stop reading like a robot.
Yeah, we say our phrase on the project is read it like you mean it.
So I like that. Go on, expand on that. What do you mean by that?
So I was just thinking about what Kathy was saying in your question around why have we ended up in this space? And I am going to loop back around to answer your question, Carl, but I think it comes back as well to the issue around testing, and whether we like it or not, I think we do find in schools a pressure to teach in a way that we test. And it's quite hard to separate out those two things. If we think about the end of Key Stage 2 and we think about our children moving into secondary, the reading test that they encounter is about retrieving information, pulling information from the text that they are given. And what Kathy and I feel really strongly about, and the way that we have shaped our project, is around encouraging children to be real readers. Read it like you mean it. What we want the children to acknowledge is that every text is written for a reason. It might be that the author is trying to make you laugh, in which case we would expect the children, whilst reading, to laugh. The text might been trying to terrify you, a nice scary story, in which case we want the children to feel the tingle down the back of their spine. If it's a text that's imparting really interesting information, we want the children to go, wow. And we both started from that point because we had real experiences, teachers ourselves, working with children, spending so long choosing the text that we thought would just set them on fire. You get to the really funny bit and a couple of children laugh, but you spot the children who don't. And it's almost like they have forgotten the real reason of reading. We read to be informed, to be amused, to be scared. We don't read to be able to correctly retrieve information in order to pass a test. So what we're trying to do is to try and pull that real purpose back, and that's what we mean by read it like you mean it. Read it in a way with convince me through your reading of this that you have understood it. So if it is a text that's meant to scare the listener, you better use your voice in order to do that. And actually, we're just completely closing that circle around what it means to be a reader. Yes, you have to be accurate, you would have to have that automatic recall of the code, but actually it's meant to do something to you as well. And that's what we're striving for.
I love that because we talk about it so much in writing, don't we? What's the purpose of your writing? Where's your writing going? But I very rarely hear that. Yeah. So actually, what was the point of this, and has it achieved that? Okay, so there's a sense of what reading is. There's a bit of a conflict around assessment. There are the challenges that children face. So you're talking about basically, reading it as it's meant to be. Anything else that sort of holds children back? Is there anything that you see often in schools that might not support this and moving things forward?
To me, there's, like anything in life, we need to practice things if we want to get better at them. And I think often there's not enough opportunity to practice reading for children, especially our struggling readers. And I quite like to use a piano playing analogy here. So if I were intent on being a concert pianist, I would need to practice the piano for hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, every single evening when I got home from work. And I would, of course, need to have a lesson, and I would expect to have one piano lesson a week where an instructor is going to support me on my skill and my craft. But then in order to be really, really good, I'm going to have to come home and practice an awful lot. And if we use that analogy to think about the teaching of reading, children receive reading lessons at school, but that's never going to turn them into a proficient, volitional, inferential reader that's gobbling up books and exploring a wide range of genres. In order to be able to do that, they need to do an awful lot of practice. And then we end up being stuck in a bit of a vicious cycle for our unconfident readers, because the very thing they need to get much, much better at is the thing that they're actually practicing the least, because we're putting way too much pressure on that practice to take place at home. And what actually needs to happen, in my view, is that the practice needs to happen within the school day. There still needs to be a lesson, of course, where we're learning the craft and we're perhaps learning how to apply that convincing expressiveness that Penny's just talked about. We've got lots of different ways of teaching teaching that sense of prosodic expression on our fluency project, but if the children aren't given plenty of opportunity to practice it, then they're not going to get better at it. So what we want to do is break the vicious cycle and create almost a sort of virtuous cycle instead, where children learn to read and they get good at it, and they realise that it's a joyful thing, that stories are going to talk to me. It's like a movie playing in my head, and then when I get home, I want to do lots of it because it's enjoyable and pleasurable. And the more I do, the better I get. And then when I get better, I want to do more of it, and then we end up in this virtuous cycle. And that's the shift that we're trying to create through the work that we do on our project, and that we often do manage to create, which is wonderful. We turn non-readers into volitional readers. But if we put too much pressure on that to happen at home, I think that's where the difficulty lies. I think it's about schools having that confidence, and I see this done so well in so many of the schools we support, where they've got that confidence to devote curriculum time to practicing reading. And what that really means is taking a book out of your bag and just reading it for the joy of it, and allowing plenty of time around the day for that to happen. And that's a challenge because timetables are tight in schools, as we all know.
So interesting, Kathy, you mentioned sort of timetable in this, and I know working with schools, that can be a real difficulty. What other sort of challenges do you see in schools that practitioners have come up against in terms of, let's just reading in general, or maybe your work around fluency? What are the challenges that practitioners in schools are facing?
I think there is, I'm going to go back to timetabling. One of the things that we know, and we remember it from being teachers ourselves, that there is very little time for, and actually, certainly when I was in the classroom, it wasn't particularly encouraged, and that is listening to older children read. You can very easily get through a significant part of the year with actually not hearing some of the children in your class read at significant length. It's quite easy enough to hear the children read a little section, but what we find, and I'll return back to that point I made about masking strategies, is that often struggling readers can read a short amount of text quite well, quite proficiently, or certainly they seem to. And if as a teacher you hear that and you kind of go, they're okay, all right. But actually what we've found is that you need to get individual readers to read quite a chunk, and then you notice where fatigue sets in. And for struggling readers, fatigue sets in pretty hard and fast. And when it does, it all falls apart. And you can almost note on the page where that happens. And you can use that as a guide, actually. And you can say to yourself, I'm going to try and work with this child so they can read this bit, this much more next time without fatigue hitting in, because they're having to work so hard to pull everything together, and they know they've really got to do that if they're going to pass the test of the teacher listening and moving on to the next child and not noticing that they're really struggling. But actually, if you dig a bit deeper, but teachers find that really difficult, giving that significant amount of time required to listen to the individual readers. But again, if we want to be tenacious about spotting those children and supporting them before it's too late, that's what we have to do.
I love that, yeah, because I guess going back to the piano analogy, that, you know, in the early days we're thinking about everything, aren't we? So then we're going to tire out, and it's a bit like handwriting, isn't it? We look at that first bit of handwriting, it's beautiful, and then we start to lose it. So I've not thought about it in terms of reading. So at the minute we started to delve into some of the typical challenges that we see in children. So you've talked about, I guess, reading stamina. What other things have you seen, particularly in the, I mean, you've got a real sample size in terms of the Hearts for Learning Fluency project. What are the sort of ways in to see where children are struggling? What do you guys do to get to the heart of it?
So dysfluency can exhibit in lots of different ways if we're thinking about that particular thread of reading difficulty. Some children sound very dysfluent very obviously, and they'll be almost crunching through a text. We often talk about that being kind of staccato reading, and they treat each word as an island, and they're often paying no attention to the punctuation. And you often almost visibly see that cognitive overload setting in, where so much headspace is being spent on trying to accurately decode the words, you can tell that there's no comprehension going on at all. And there's often a real lack of expression or prosody as another way of saying that sense of phrasing, that sense of musicality and expression that we would expect to hear when a reader gets what they're reading at the point of reading. So there's often that crunchy staccato read, and that's often telling us we need to do some work there to support. Even if the accuracy is okay, as in they're reading the words correctly, it's just taking them a long time, and there's perhaps a bit of blending going on where they're still kind of sounding the words out. But sometimes children actually read at a pretty good rate, so they might rapidly read all of those words correctly. And there was a time in the UK where we were quite heavily focused on reading rate as a measure of success. So lots of children have learnt to read very quickly. This means I'm good at reading if I can do it quickly and I can say all the words correctly. But you can still sense that there's no comprehension there. And if you were to ask the child a series of questions, oh, why is she feeling that way in the story? Or I wonder what's going to happen next? They're really unable to answer simple comprehension questions. So again, that tells us that there's still too much cognitive energy being devoted to trying to say the words correctly, and there's not enough headspace left for comprehension. And what our desire is to achieve comprehension. I keep coming back to this. That's what we want. We want our children to understand what they're reading. So there's a few things that we do to support that sense of disfluency. We want to teach the children not only to read with accuracy, and that often comes from your phonics approach, but they also need to be able to read with automaticity. And that means really reading without overtly crunching through, blending the words, applying that phonic knowledge. It almost needs to happen instantaneously. So they're not even aware that they're able to recognise that word on sight. They see a word, no cognitive space is being used up in saying it. I just know automatically what that word's saying. And then that allows me to have some headspace left to understand the text at the point of reading.
I like that. So what should schools do to get to the heart of reading problems then? So is there testing? I mean, listening to children read is number one, isn't it? Both of you said.
Absolutely.
I can tell they're missing the punctuation, they haven't quite got a grasp of what they're reading, it's quite staccato. Are there other tests and other approaches that schools can use?
I mean, I think that is, if you're going to keep it simple, then that is the most important thing you can do. You take a text of, say, 300 words, something like that. The first challenge for teachers particularly is to make sure that text is in line with age-related expectations. So it's got to be a challenging text. And you ask the child to read that text. And we encourage teachers to do a really simple miscue analysis. So by that, we're asking them to note when a child misses a word or they mispronounce a word. Sometimes they reverse the word. To note all of those different things about how the child is reading, and then use that to inform. But above and beyond that, I would say the most important thing are the bits that Kathy is related back to, which is that notion of prosody, which is that third element of reading fluency, which is the rhythm. So do the children read the text in a way that makes it easier for both the listener, the external listener, to understand what that text is about? And if it's hard for the external listener to understand what that text is about, you can pretty much guarantee that it's also hard for the child who is reading the text to understand. So if they are grouping words together that simply should not be grouped together, that distorts the meaning. So it's a really simple idea. We know naturally that the words once, upon, a, time should be read once upon a time. A disfluent reader, although they're unlikely to get that phrase, say that in a disfluent way, but we might get once upon a time there was a princess who in that, you see what I'm getting at. So just by group, they might be able to decode, they've got their accuracy, they've got their automaticity, but actually they're not singing the right tune. And in doing so, the meaning of that text remains hidden within those words. So that's a big part of the work that we are doing through our Reading Fluency project, which is really highlighting the importance of prosodic reading and how that opens up comprehension for struggling readers.
I was going to say, people often consider prosody to be an outcome once children already understand what they're reading. So we consider an expression to be something, good expression will be something that might come once a child is able to break that code and read at a good rate.
And that is true.
And that is true. But what we've worked out on our project is that it's not an outcome. Prosody isn't an outcome of sort of word reading plus comprehension equals prosody. It doesn't really work that way. Prosody needs to come first. So it's sort of word reading plus prosody all together at the same time will lead us to comprehension. So it's about kind of shifting that notion on its head, and in some cases, for particularly disfluent children, it's unapologetically teaching that sense of phrasing and musicality and emphasis at the point of reading before going anywhere near comprehension. We're not going to teach you how to skim and scan and how to retrieve words and how to infer. We're not going to do that yet, because first of all, we're just going to read the text in a way that it's intended to be read so that the meaning can come to life. And you can teach that. You can develop a sense of phrasing, a sense of storytelling and performance at the point of reading, which will take children to comprehension before even tackling that as a teacher.
But that's, you know, if we go back to what teachers and parents can be doing to support with reading, bringing text to life through, we call it expert modelling, which is just reading the text in a way that allows you as best as you can to convey the meaning of the text simply through reading the words on the page in the way that they are meant to be read. So one of the things we ask our teachers to do before we teach them anything about the strategies they can use, we'll say, right, read this text. And a teacher will instantly read a text. I did it myself. I used to do this. You read it and you think, what questions could I ask the children about this text? But actually, there's a stage well before that, which is just read the text and soak up the intended meaning from the text, because that is the thing that you have got to get through across to the children using your voice alone and the words on the page. So we ask our teachers to read in a way that absolutely lays bare the meaning of the text to the listener. And that is a skill, and that is hard. But actually in doing so, and that's what our early years teachers are so fantastic at doing, we need to be doing that all through the school. And we need to be modelling. If you're reading a text to the children and it's genuinely funny, then you should model laughing. Or if it's genuinely shocking, you should model going, oh, goodness me, did you get that bit as well? So that we are modelling to the children at all points the true purpose of reading, which is to be affected in some way.
I guess this brings us back to the point then that it's school's job to drive that, because I'm just picturing, certain parents might not feel confident with that. If I take myself back 10 years, I don't think I would. In the early days of my own children, I'm not reading a story because it's a long time since I've read a story or things like that. Any advice around sort of parents bringing stories to life or other options?
Well, I have to say, we have found through our work that, believe it or not, many teachers are quite daunted by that. Okay. And I think...
Was that a surprise?
Yeah.
It was, wasn't it?
It was a real surprise. And I think we could look back to teacher training and routes into teaching for this. Is there enough emphasis placed on teaching teachers not how to read in the traditional sense, they've got their accuracy and the automaticity, but are they doing that bit around prosody that we know is so essential to comprehension? I think I was quite actually pleased with some of the results of the National Literacy Trust report that came out last week, which talked about audio books and children being, for the first time, reporting more engagement with audiobooks than books. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that I don't want that balance to be in place, but actually, audiobooks should be a real staple in the classroom.
I was going to say, we teach prosody and expressive reading orally. That's the way that we need to teach it. Children hear that wonderful storytelling voice, whether it's by us or whether it's by an actor on an audiobook.
They practice it themselves.
They practice. But the goal is really that children then apply that when they're reading to themselves too. And this is often forgotten, that prosody is also applied when reading silently in one's head. We have to apply it there. Also when we're reading aloud, because that's when that whatever that is, that story, that non-fiction text that we're reading comes to life, is through our own application of prosody at the point of reading, whether it's in our heads or out loud. So we often tell our teachers who are on our Reading Fluency project to remind the children when they're applying that piano practice analogy again, when they're practicing reading around the rest of the reading diet or around the rest of the day in other curriculum areas, reminding them to switch that prosody on. We don't just do it in our reading lessons, we need to do it all the time if we want what we're reading to come to life to us in our heads.
5-star reading, or A-game reading, and we say to the children, or we say to the teachers who are ultimately going to work with the children, get the children used to a term. A-star reading, right, we've got to really understand this. This is going to require our A game reading. So we make that analogy of the fact that, are you doing a kickabout with the ball on the football pitch, or is it a game? In which case that's going to be serious. So when we do A-star reading, we're saying, okay, we need to understand this. What we're going to do, we're going to bring our prosodic voice. And we see the children go, deep breath.
Body language.
It's a completely different way of tackling the text. They know that this is going to be hard. And when we work with the children via the teachers, we say, give them hard texts and tell them it's going to be hard. Therefore, we're going to keep it really tight, bit like a really difficult exercise, a HIIT exercise. You can't do that for long. You're going to really work hard. We're going to really hone in. We're going to feel really successful on this. And then we're going to be tired afterwards. I often say to the children, if you're not tired after reading this, you haven't been busy enough. We talk about busy brain reading.
Yes.
I love that.
Busy brain reading. This is going to require busy brain reading. This isn't just an eye activity. I want you there when you're reading this. And I think we both talked about how our absolute goal, when we used to talk to our children, and it was silent reading time, and we actually used to talk about the fact that silent reading might sound silent if someone walked into the room, but if I were in your head now, that would be a very noisy place. And children, I know if you're going to be doing really good silent reading, because I'm going to know if you get to a good bit, because your eyebrows are going to go up.
Still getting those reactions to get.
And I know if you're going to get to a really good bit, because you're going to do that to your friend, you're going to nudge them, and you're going to point to the bit. What we know, if they're not doing that busy brain reading, and every teacher knows this, you see a child periodically turn a page. They've worked out just how often they need to turn the page to make it look like they're actually reading, but actually that's not a sign of busy brain reading at all. Busy brain reading is where you go,
seeing the reactions and the things you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you talked about audiobooks and things online and the wonderful world of technology. I guess technology in itself is seen as a challenge, though, and it's sort of fighting for children's attention. Are there any other examples where you've seen really good use of technology, and what are your thoughts about technology in the wider sense and the impact on reading? What do you guys think?
Yeah, our children books are very much in competition with tech, aren't they? I certainly experienced that with my own children. And what we need to turn books into isn't a chore and a punishment. Once you've finished with that piece of technology, I'm going to insist that you do some reading as though it were a chore or a punishment. We need the book to be the carrot and not the stick, don't we, in many scenarios. There's a couple of ways that I suggest doing that, and Penny talked about busy brain reading and hard work reading, and I think when children are in school and they're perhaps being guided through an excellent high quality fluency lesson or a phonics lesson with the teacher, they're going to be working really hard and they'll be reading really successfully, but that might be quite exhausting. What we need to find opportunities for children to do in the independent read is something really joyful that feels nice and easy, and actually it's about getting the pitch absolutely right for that independent read. Sometimes, even as adults, you want to be able to read something that's just nice and easy, and that for me might be a kind of a trashy magazine or a really lovely novel that's really easy to read and gobble through really quickly. We all need to be reading for pleasure in those ways as well. So it's about getting the pitch absolutely right and the interest level absolutely right, so that book is a carrot. And I've found some fantastic success with graphic novels for children that don't identify as readers yet, and actually that might be a really great way to get them hooked. It could be perhaps a collection of short stories, and they've got that satisfaction of completing the story arcs really quickly. It could be comics, there's nothing wrong with that. Let's not ban any books. It can be absolutely anything that they want to read that they're going to get joy from. And in addition to using the right book that's pitched correctly so it feels lovely and easy and enjoyable and has that high appeal, finding out what the children want, speaking to them about all of those things. In addition to that, we can also use technology to our advantage sometimes, and there are lots of really lovely apps that exist out there now where children are able to read and to learn from reading and through reading by using technology as well. So I think it's about embracing the technology that serves us, such as audiobooks. That's a lovely example. Lots and lots of apps, library apps and things now as well, that serve books that way as well, but also getting the text right around the edges so that they want to read.
That's the bit I was going to pick up on, Kathy, because I think More so than ever, teachers have got to be thinking about the best text. There's no time, there's no opportunity for mediocre texts to be presented to children when the competition is so very, very fierce. Teachers have to, through talking to each other, parents talking to each other, recommendations, be seeking out those texts that they know are going to have the power to connect in some way or another with, firstly, themselves, because I think if a teacher finds a text that makes them go, or whatever that reaction is, then they know that that is a text that they can use to provoke a reaction with their children. So really hunting down those texts. Short stories we absolutely advocate and believe in, because for struggling readers, they allow a child to experience a complete story arc and get to the end. Because so often struggling readers, if they're reading extracts as part of their school experience, and the teacher says, oh, if you're liking that the sound of this story, you can go and finish the book. A struggling reader isn't really going to have that opportunity. But short, complete stories allows for that sense of completion to get through to the end of the story. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing I would say is that one of the reasons, surely, that technology is so popular is that the experience is immersive. It's not just reading, it's reading with pictures, with sounds. It's just a complete full sense experience. We have to be able to show children how texts do that as well. So in the classroom, we need to be thinking about what sound effect would we add to this story, children? Where would we add the sound of a creaking door? So bring it to life for the children. Yes, it's not there, ready. You have to bring something to it. But helping children to see that it can be all immersive, I think is the role of the teacher.
I'm picturing YouTubers there, because that's what they do, don't they? They bring you back to life again.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying about the reading, really.
Yeah.
You're not actually doing that, but what would this look like? What would it feel like?
Yeah. And teachers are amazing at creating worlds within their classrooms. I'm not saying decorating the classroom from top to bottom, but if it's a creepy story, turn the lights out. Have things ready to just push those reluctant readers off the edge of holding back, being reticent around reading, not giving, just dipping a toe, push them in, through props, through ideas, through sound, through that full immersive experience. Drama activities, really, I suppose, is what I'm talking about there.
I love it. So basically, we're getting these different layers. So we might have to do our busy brain reading. We're working super hard. There's a time and a place to read a less challenging book. So a 10-year-old grabbing a picture book is fine.
Got to be space for all of these things.
Absolutely.
Plugging into an audio book as well. There was a time when I was teaching where pretty much every classroom had a listening post.
Yes.
Do you remember listening posts? And
huge headphones.
oh, they're amazing.
Yes.
Amazing headphones. And I used to have 6 children sitting around the listening post, and they'd have the text there as well. And I would love it if they all burst out into laughter at one point, and the whole class would stop and go, oh, they've got to a funny bit, haven't they? Again, it's just those little nudges, those little indications, teaching children what reading is about.
I think that's a really strong message, isn't it? They said, what's the purpose of this? Because there's a time and a place where I need to read this, because if I don't, I'm going to break something, maybe some instructions, or I really
want to make it well.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
Yeah, that's it. And maybe that's a key part to play at home, isn't it? Really, what is the point of that reading? Not you must sit to get your star and do your reading. Let's get back to what's the point of this.
Yeah.
I guess find the purpose for each child.
Yeah. Does this story remind us of Grandad?
Yeah.
Or let's think about Grandad for a minute. Or does it make us want to buy a pet? Yeah. Would we be able to look after a pet? Every piece of writing should have a way into something more than it simply being marks on a page. And the more we can hook into that, and the more we can show interest in that and model how just a few marks on a page can get us thinking, provoking thought, that's really important for children.
Now, you talked about your project, and we can't not talk about it. So in terms of priority literacy, I was so keen to get your work into the project, and I'm so glad I did. I can remember visiting a school over in Chester. Now, I saw your fluency approach in action firsthand. I was just blown away, really. I'd seen the data and this can have such an impact on reading. I'm like, oh, really? And then I saw it and I was just blown away with it. So we brought it to the Priority Literacy Project. And I'm keen for you guys to tell people more about your fluency project. Where did it come from? sort of a whistle-stop tour of it, and I'm really keen to hear what bits are you most proud of.
I've got to jump in because I can remember it as clearly as if it were yesterday, really.
Okay.
Sitting in a room in a school with a brilliant subject leader. It was a junior school, and I'd been working with this school for some time, and they were just a really great forward-thinking school. They worked me hard as an advisor because they were doing everything. You couldn't simply go in and say, oh, well, have you tried this? This is what they'd done it all. And this was at the time, now it was this 2016, summer of 2016, when the Key Stage 2 test, the reading test that children do at the end of primary school, got a bit harder. They got quite a bit harder. And this school were thinking, they'd just finished the test, and they were looking at their year 5s and their year 4s and thinking, goodness me, I'm not sure if they are on the right trajectory, some of the children, to meet that standard.
Because the amount of words, everything has increased, isn't it?
The questions were harder, the topics were trickier. It did come as a bit of a shock, didn't it? So that was a real opening. As I said, it was just a joy to work in this school, and I've been really lucky to have lots of experiences where I'm working in these schools where they're just working wonders. So it was an opportunity to try something new. And we'd been working together and with colleagues back at HFL Education looking at some research, but mostly it was research that had been applied to Key Stage 1 or early years, this idea of modelling the prosody, modelling how the text should be read in a way that would make the meaning clear, and then the children reading the text in the same way. We call that echo reading, and that allowing reading a text in the way it's meant to be read, allowing comprehension to flourish. It just seemed too good to be true, but we thought we'll try it. So we got a group of children together who were all of a similar level, all not quite on track, and we got them to read a text individually and then ask some questions about the text, and sure enough, they really struggled with the basics of answering that text. So 20 minutes later, we repeated, but what we did within that 20 minutes is, without discussing the text at all, discussing any of the language, we modelled to the children, sentence by sentence, sometimes phrase by phrase, how that text should be read in a way that would make the meaning clear. And we simply read it, and in 20 minutes we read some bits a couple of times, some bits 3 or 4 times, until they got it right, until they read it in a way that was really echoing the model. And then we asked them the same questions again, and the change was shocking. It still shocks us now. And I came back to our office and explained to Kathy what I'd seen. And Kathy became absolutely obsessed with trialling it in lots of different schools. Yeah. And we would constantly come back together saying, it works. And I think for me that represented, there's so much we learnt from this, but I think one of the things that I learned mostly was that prior to that, and it now being in many schools, I often used to find scenarios in schools where in reading sessions, the teachers would work harder than the children. So there might be a small group reading session and they'd read the text, but the children really didn't understand it. And the teacher had to work so hard, going more and more nuanced with the questions to try and tease out information from the children. And in the end, the children might eventually hit on the right kind of answer.
Enough clues.
Enough clues going on. But actually, the teacher would end the session exhausted, and the children wouldn't have actually read much, and they certainly didn't get much better in their reading. But in this model, the children worked so hard for that 20 minutes, and then they were ready. And all the teacher need do is allow the conversation to flourish. And we often say, we divide our Reading Fluency project into 2 parts, part 1, part 2. You do 2 sessions a week. And session 2 begins with, so, what did you think? Tell me about this text.
It's really open.
Yes.
And in the past, had we asked the children that question before they'd done that preliminary work, it would have been
a blank face.
It's all right. It would have been like pulling teeth. But actually, and once you've done that work, and then we set them to read it a couple of times again before we meet again, because we know repeated reading really works. then the children are ready. And you can go so much deeper with the comprehension.
Put all the groundwork in.
The groundwork is there.
Absolutely. And what's amazing about this, and it's all based not only in evidence and research that we've been reading, particularly from, for instance, Tim Rosinski in the States, where reading fluency instructions had quite a high profile compared to the UK at that time. What our research told us was that this repeated reading, which we make really motivational and really fun for the children, because there's an element of performance when they read their text aloud and the way it was intended to be read. They want to do it, they're motivated to do these rereads, that the rereads are going to build this automaticity, and that us teaching them the prosody is going to develop a sense of prosody and a sense of phrasing. So people often say, oh, what Penny's described there, that's all very well. Of course, if you've provided a lot of intense instruction for them for 20 minutes, they're going to be able to understand that text. But what about tomorrow in a history lesson? How's that going to benefit them?
This is where the miracle,
the magic happens, in that learning really does generalise. So then in the following day, in the history lesson, they're presented with a piece of text. That sense of phrasing and that sense of automaticity and fluency, really, they're able to apply it. It carries over into whatever they're reading around the rest of their day. And suddenly we see their reading achievement improve across the board. And that's really when we start to see that magic happen. It takes a number of weeks of this.
and that's what we call the
practice.
A-star reading or the 5-star reading, whatever we say to teach. You call it what you like, but it's a special type of reading where the children have got to bring their prosody, sit up straight, know it's going to be tough. And they do, and when they read like that, they're reading in a very different way.
How powerful to say that something I did and something I did well is going to equip me for the next bit. And then the next. So essentially what you're saying is that learn this text, do all that practice, all that great work, but the next text will be a little bit easier. I'm bringing more to the table, and then we'll build from there.
I suppose it's like practicing tennis over and over and over again, and then finding that actually that makes you quite good at the basics of badminton.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
Bringing a bit more than I did before over to that.
and then all
Okay.
you've got to teach is the nuance
Yes.
to go across those disciplines.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions. That's really interesting. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody listening has as well. If you're interested in this topic and you want to continue to delve into it, please do reach out to the Literacy Excellence Centre. There'll be more CPD and more opportunities to engage in that. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.